Are you like most sales and other professionals who want to grow their wealth faster than what they are currently doing through their company 401k, even with that company match, the stock market, or just plain saving money? Would you sleep better at night if you had the financial freedom to be job optional in just 3 to 5 years through investing in real assets? Maybe you don't want to stop working, but wouldn't it be cool if you could retire a decade earlier than most and do the traveling you and your family have planned for years while you're still young and can enjoy it? Let's face it, most busy professionals don't have the time or desire to take on more work outside of their W-2 to grow their wealth. On The Wealth Flow, each week we share the stories, the investments, and take a deep dive into the various asset classes that can deliver that accelerated growth to your portfolio passively. That's right, no extra work for you. Instead, we'll put your money to work. Learn what the 95% aren't talking about and join the top 5% of earners today on The Wealth Flow.
All right, welcome to The Wealth Flow. My guest today is Michael Johnston. He is a certified financial advisor. He's also a financial industry veteran with a passion for improving outcomes for retail investors. Following a stint in corporate finance and investment banking, Michael founded ETF Database and grew it to the largest independent media property covering exchange traded fund. Under Michael's leadership, the company achieved a commanding position within the ETF industry and played a key role in the low-cost revolution that saw hundreds of billions of dollars flowing from expensive mutual funds to low-cost ETFs. Michael is also the co-founder of Wealth Channel with a mission of helping investors achieve financial independence by radically simplifying retirement planning and investing. Michael's responsible for the Wealth Channel's content and education initiatives, including its flagship Wealth Channel Academy. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for that great intro. I appreciate it.
No problem. All right. Well, what I like to typically do, Michael, is really just kind of get started with, where you grew up. I know that's dialing it back a little bit, but and then what eventually led you into the financial industry?
Yeah. So I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, home of the Ohio State University. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio as the son of 2 University of Michigan graduates. So
Okay.
I don't know how many college football fans we have out there, but pretty heated rivalry. So grew up in Columbus, Ohio. Always kind of had an aptitude and a knack and enjoyed anything related to math and related to numbers. So when I found myself in college, I went to the University of Notre Dame, kind of gravitated towards economics, and eventually became a finance major. And I love it. I'm happy to admit I'm an Excel nerd. I'm a numbers nerd. I love diving in and geeking out on spreadsheets and scenario analyses and the like. So that's kind of always stuck with me from a pretty young age.
Okay, fantastic. And so when you your bio basically read that there was you had a stint in corporate finance and then investment banking, and then eventually getting into the ETFs. So I guess maybe tell me a little bit about that journey, and then we'll dive into the ETFs because I got a million questions on that as well.
Yeah, so I started my career at Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan, in the corporate finance. To be honest, like Ford is a great company, incredible American institution. It was not the job for me. It was glorified bean counting and a lot of pencil pushing. And there's great people there, and I think really highly of the company. But it wasn't for me. So I got into something that was a little bit more creative and kind of went over to the investment banking and private valuation side of it, where we got to kind of lift up the hood, go under the hood on a ton of businesses, everything from professional basketball teams to junkyards in Joliet, Illinois, and everything in between. And by the way, the junkyards are in some ways a lot more interesting than those super sexy businesses, right?
Right.
But got to lift up the hoods and do valuations for a lot of different purposes, helping folks sell their businesses, helping them do estate planning, Not always the happy stuff too. Sometimes there's shareholder disputes and they're at each other's throats and one wants to buy another out. So, very, like I mentioned, my nose deep in an Excel workbook and doing these analyses to kind of come up with what the fair value of a business is. Did that for a few years and I loved it. But ultimately, I kind of had this entrepreneurial itch that I think it probably resonates with a lot of your listeners, Keith, and wanted to go out on my own and to start my own business. I guess to kind of zoom out here a little bit and go back, being this finance guy, right? And being I think everyone, has one of these in their group of friends or their family. You get all these questions from people in your life who are really smart and really sophisticated, but they're maybe not so much with finance or with investing. This might be a person who you think really highly of, and they're sharp, they're bright, but you realize they're, for lack of a better word, they're kind of dumb when it comes to numbers and when it comes to investing. And they're asking questions that are pretty basic for me. So it feels great to be able to help those people out and to give them answers. But you also kind of realize how people can go off the rails, or they can get sucked into bad deals, bad products, make bad investing decisions. Again, not because they're not savvy, but just because this is, they didn't get a finance degree. They didn't do the CFA curriculum. They don't have this background. So it's like, if I tried to go install a roof or do surgery on someone, right, it'd be a disaster because I don't have that background and I don't have that expertise. So anyways, it kind of sparked this passion in me for helping everyday retail investors to realize better outcomes. And at the time, one of what I saw the biggest flaws or the biggest areas of improvement was people paying way, way, way too much in fees and management fees. So I'm a big believer that taxes and fees are a huge part of investing, whether it's plain vanilla stuff or whether it's more sophisticated and advanced vehicles. If you can minimize taxes and if you can minimize fees, you're most of the way there. Like that's two huge steps that you can take. And at the time, most assets were in mutual funds, and a lot of these mutual funds charge these crazy expense ratios. They charge 1%, 2%. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but over time, it just adds up and it takes a huge bite out of bottom line returns. What matters is what you keep, right? So it's not what you earn, it's what you keep, and taxes and fees take a big bite out of that a lot of times. So anyways, we recognized there was something relatively new at the time. It was called exchange traded funds. And it was essentially part of the indexing boom, shifting money away from active management where you're paying people to pick stocks and saying, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to own the S&P 500. I'm just going to own the Russell 3000. And I'm going to pay a lot less to do it. And I'm going to bet that at the end of the day, I'm going to come out ahead if I do that.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess tell me maybe what is the difference really between an ETF and say an index fund, or is an index fund an ETF? I don't know. So
yeah, great question. So there's kind of a bunch of terminology here. So the distinguish is a lot of folks distinguish between mutual fund and ETF, but historically mutual funds have been actively managed, meaning there's a team of analysts and I'm going to use a stock example, but it could be bonds, it could be other asset classes, but there's a team of analysts and a fund manager, and they're going out and they're analyzing a bunch of stocks, and they're saying we're gonna beat the market essentially, right? We're gonna outperform the market because we're really smart and we know what we're doing, and we're gonna pick the winners and we're gonna avoid the losers, and we're gonna deliver alpha. And by the way, you're gonna pay us a fair amount to do that. Now, it sounds great, but the problem is nobody can do that consistently. Warren Buffett can do that consistently, but I'm not Warren Buffett.
right.
You're not Warren Buffett, no offense. Most folks in the audience, again, no offense, you're not Warren Buffett. You're not going to beat the market consistently. So what kind of the transformation that took place was forget this expensive active management. Let's do cheap passive indexing and just own the S&P 500. Don't try to pick the winners. Don't try to pick the losers. So to get back to your question here, there are historically, and it still is this way, that mutual funds are generally active management, and that means they're generally more expensive. ETFs are generally passive, meaning they'll just buy and hold an entire index, and they are lower cost. There's not much to do there, right? You're just buying the 500 stocks and come check back on it in a year, essentially. So there are, to get back to your question though, there are actively managed ETFs. and there are passive or indexed mutual funds. So there's kind of a structure and a strategy. The structure is ETF versus mutual fund, and the strategy is active versus passive. And it tends to be that the most popular ETFs are passive and the most popular mutual funds are active. But again, there's some that fall into different buckets there.
Okay. And so when you buy an index, so you're buying this just like the S&P 500, or do you is there a way to have sections of, whether it be technology stocks only, or is it just, if you're going to do it, it's part of the lump of just everything in the S&P 500?
Yeah, no, great question. So this industry started off very plain vanilla. And by that, I mean, it was, you buy the S&P 500, you buy the Dow Jones Industrial Average, you buy the Russell 3000. If it's bonds, you buy the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index, which holds corporate bonds and government bonds. And then from there, it got increasingly more specialized. So there are sector funds that hold a particular sector: technology, real estate, industrials, materials, consumer discretionary, consumer staples, all of that. There are country specific. You want to buy the Canadian stock market. You want to buy the Chinese stock market. There's a bunch of different ways to kind of slice and dice that. Same thing in the bond market, very narrow segments of the bond market, both international and domestic. So you can focus on junk bonds. You can focus on short-term U.S. government bonds. So pretty much any permutation that you can come up with, there's an ETF to do it, or there has been at some point. They don't always stick around. But like, for example, there was an ETF that was just focusing on companies headquartered in the state of Oklahoma. Like, I don't think that made it, because that's not a great investment thesis.
Right.
Right. But so it didn't really attract investment dollars. But my point is that it got quickly moved from the very plain vanilla to the kind of very, very specialized.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And
somewhat ironically there, a lot of those became used for not this kind of long-term buy and holding that they were designed for, but they became used, and a lot of them still are, as they're used very frequently by active traders, right? So you look at something like the S&P 500 index fund, and it's designed for someone to buy and hold it and, come back and check on it every year, essentially. But what's actually happening is there's a lot of folks doing that, kind of using it as it was originally intended. And then there's a lot of folks who are essentially just trading it, going in and out of it, multiple times a day. So it's this interesting thing where it was kind of designed with one purpose in mind. And then as it became more specialized and there are ways to make these kind of short-term bets, it kind of became used for, in a way, the exact opposite purpose of what it was designed for. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't still work extremely well as a long-term buy and hold vehicle.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess maybe tell us a little bit about some of the advantages. You mentioned fees and the fee structure. When I think mutual funds, I think diversification. But yeah, I do know that the fees are significantly higher in that. But what are some of the other advantages?
Yeah, great question. So one is the liquidity. So if you want to sell a mutual fund, you've got to wait until essentially the end of the day to do it. You put in a request and then you're redeemed or you buy at the end of the day. ETFs trade like stocks, meaning you can essentially move in and out throughout the course of the day. So it's matching up buyers and sellers. Instead of interacting directly with the fund company, you're not selling back to the fund company, but you're selling to another participant out there. I might be saying, I'm going to sell my S&P 500 ETF. And you might be saying, well, I'm going to put it in order to buy one. And there's a market making mechanism that essentially connects us, and you interact with other investors. The upside of that is that you're able to trade these throughout the course of the day if you want to do that. There's also some, and this kind of comes back to the other pillar that I was talking about. There's some tax advantages to the ETF structure. So essentially, you can avoid some of the capital gain when a mutual fund, when it does its rebalancing, it can inadvertently pass through some taxable events to its investors. That doesn't happen with the ETF. It gets super technical and super into the weeds, but they're way more tax efficient. So they pass through fewer taxable events essentially to the investor. So you're going to have to pay less taxes. There's less of a tax drag typically with the exchange traded fund structure. And again, I'm a huge believer in the importance of taxes when it comes to investing. So that's music to my ears. I think that's an often overlooked thing, but anything you can do to minimize your tax burden is fantastic. So those are kind of a few of the advantages: the tax efficiency, the enhanced liquidity, as well as not to mention the significantly lower costs.
Okay. And something you mentioned there that maybe I wasn't aware of. So you buy into a mutual fund, but as you
Mhm.
mentioned, that they rebalance from time to time. So when they're
Yeah.
doing that, and they're selling off one, going into another. If there was a gain, does that get passed down to you as a taxable
A lot of
event?
times it will.
Mhm.
It gets pretty technical. So Vanguard, for example, actually has a patent on a structure that allows them to avoid that with their index mutual funds. But a
Okay.
lot of times mutual funds, yes, if they're and this is particularly relevant for these actively managed mutual funds that are moving in and out of positions with a much greater frequency, right?
Right.
So yes, typically that will be passed through, and that's never great, right? Because that's essentially a lot of times that's essentially phantom income in a way because you didn't get cash for it, but you've got a tax bill at the end of the year, right? And that's
Right.
that's the opposite of what you want. What you want to get is you want to be getting cash that's tax free, and not the other way around. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds there to have that scenario.
And so how does the ETF, maybe avoid that? Is it because you're not rebalancing, you're buying in, it's more of a buy and hold, or is it just through the structure of it, it's
Yeah, it's just
somehow avoids?
it's through the structure of it and through the structure and the exemptions that these ETF companies have used, the so-called 1940 Act funds,
Okay.
that allows them to do things in such a way that those are non-taxable events.
Okay. Very interesting. Let me maybe ask you a little something that would be, more in line with your Wealth Channel and maybe the Wealth Channel Academy. But when you look at, and talk with investors out there, what are some of the, biggest, I guess, misconceptions, some things that maybe by being in this industry, you're like, a lot of times folks come to me and they don't quite know this, but here's a strategy that we can apply. Now, I guess give us maybe some examples from that.
Yeah, sure. So I think I might sound like a little bit of a broken record here, and I hope that folks' eyes aren't glad. A lot of people hear taxes, right, and they zone out, right? They think, oh, that sounds like so boring and so scary. But this is like the biggest misconception. It's my what I'm really passionate about is if you can minimize taxes, like taxes are our biggest expense in life, right?
For
Like
sure.
think about that for a minute. It is the biggest expense that you have in life. And a lot of people just have this very, I guess, defeatist attitude about taxes. They think there's nothing I can do about it, or they're scared of it. They think, oh, if I try to do anything, I'm going to end up getting audited. I'm going to end up in jail. I'm going to end up paying fines. And like that's just not the case. Like there are so many ways out there that virtually any investor can use to legally defer and eliminate and reduce their tax bill. And the fact of the matter is, like, these are tax incentives, right? Like, actually, the government wants you to use these. They are
Right.
incentivizing you to use these. They're begging you to use these things. So there are some plain vanilla things like maxing out your 401k, using a health savings account. I'm happy to kind of dive into any of these. The tax code is really written for business owners, and it's written for folks who invest in alternative assets like real estate. So there's kind of more complex things, or things like opportunity zones, 1031 exchanges. There's a ton of things out there that folks can use to lower their tax liabilities. But this is in my mind the biggest misconception. It's the biggest myth that people have is to be honest, like they just pay way too much in taxes, right? And when you think about what that means, that like in real life terms, that means they retire later than they should. They don't have the retirement that they want. They don't pass on as much as they could to their kids. So, certainly, there are things that the tax dollars are needed to go towards, and we need to pay for certain things as a society. But I'd encourage everyone out there to investigate the ways that you can lower your tax liability, because there are ways you can do it legally and relatively easily as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Why don't maybe we go into the health savings account and some of the
Yeah.
advantages of that?
Yeah. Oh, great. Let's do it. So, essentially, how this works is I call it the stealth IRA. It's essentially IRA is an individual retirement arrangement. It's a tax advantaged account that you can set money aside into. The problem is you're limited with how much money you can put into an IRA, into an individual retirement arrangement. I think it's $6,500 for this year, or $7,000 if you're over age 50. You can do a little bit of a catch-up contribution. So this is a way to essentially get more money into a tax-advantaged account. So the way that a health savings account works is you set it up, you fund it, and that is a tax-deductible funding. So saying if I'm going to put $5,000 into my health savings account this year, that's going to reduce my taxable income by $5,000. So I pay less in taxes this year. So it's a tax deferral mechanism in the current year. And then that money grows tax-free. So you don't pay taxes on dividends. You don't pay taxes on any capital gains you realize, compared to a money in your taxable brokerage account where you'd get this tax drag, where you'd be paying taxes each year. So that's kind of the second tax advantage here. And then if you use this health savings account for qualified medical expenses, you can withdraw from it tax-free. So you invest, it grows in value. A lot of times when you take out of an account, you've got to pay taxes then. As long as you're using it for qualified medical expenses, that withdrawal is tax-free. But there's a little wrinkle here, which is if you don't use it for medical expenses, but you wait until age 65, then there's no penalty. It's just taxed as if it were an IRA. So you would just pay the ordinary income tax rates then. So if you use it for medical expenses, you get 3 tax breaks. You get the deferral when you contribute to it. You get to avoid the capital gains and the dividend taxes while the money grows. And then you get to withdraw tax-free. So that's in a perfect world. There's those 3 advantages. But even if you don't use it for medical expenses and you just wait until your retirement, and then you say, I'm going to take money out of this and I'm going to buy a boat, or I'm going to go on vacation, or I'm going to go gamble it away in Vegas, like anything, you still get those first 2 tax advantages. Now, you don't get the third one because your withdrawals are going to be taxable, but still those first 2 can add up to quite a bit of money, especially because this is a renewable tax incentive, which means you can contribute each year like you could to an IRA or like you could to a 401k. So you can do this year after year. There's a couple, the one big limitation here is you have to be on what's called a high deductible health plan, which a lot of folks are. So that's the one caveat, is you've got to be on this type of plan in order to use it. The other risk, or the other thing to be aware of, is you do have to, if you try to withdraw before your age of 65, you're going to pay some penalties. But if you've got the capital, and if you're looking for ways to shelter more of your money from taxes, such as you move money from a taxable account to a tax advantage or tax protected account, this is an awesome tool. Again, they call it the stealth IRA, but incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's interesting. And is there a cap as to, I'm sure there is, how much you can contribute to it per year?
Yeah, there is. I don't have the number off the top of my head. It's about $8,000 or $9,000 for family. So again, you're capped at a relatively low amount, but that adds up if you do it every year, year in and year out. And especially for any younger folks out there who have time on their side and are going to have this, like Albert Einstein said, compounding returns are the 8th wonder of the world. So the longer you can grow money tax free, the better. So definitely worth looking into for the younger folks out there.
Yeah, for sure. That is neat, and I could see why you called it the beginning the stealth IRA.
Stealth IRA.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And so that, just to clarify again, doesn't matter if you use it all during that year. It kind of resets every year, and you can recontribute 8,000.
Yeah, that's right. Great question. It's not like there's a flex savings account that's kind of like use it or lose it.
Okay, that may have been what I had.
That's probably what you're thinking of too. So this is not that. You can put the money in, and you can do a couple things. You could, if you have qualified medical expenses, you could take out the money to pay for it, or you could just leave the money in there. There's this like little wrinkle and this little loophole where you don't have to reimburse yourself, or you don't have to take the money out. There's no time limit on that. So like, say I pay for surgery this year, but I just pay for it out of pocket. Mm-hmm. I can say, you know what, I could take this money out of my HSA to reimburse myself or to pay for this, but I don't want to do that because it's growing tax-free in there. And if I take it out, I'm going to have to put it in a taxable account. You can just you can save, you got to be organized. You can save the receipts, save all the documentation, and then let that money keep growing. And then 30 years from now, you can go in and say, okay, now I'm going to reimburse myself for that shoulder surgery I had back when I was 40. But in the meantime, my money has kind of continued to grow tax-free. So I think that's kind of a neat little wrinkle of this, that you're not required to reimburse yourself or to take the money out at the time of the expense. But again, you got to be organized. You got to keep this stuff. I think it's not rocket science, right? You just got to have ideally a digital way to kind of keep all this documentation so that if you are ever audited, you've got a pretty clear audit trail and not in any risk there.
For sure. Well, one other question on that health savings account is from an investment vehicle, beyond being the tax sheltered, how is it growing in that account? Is it growing? Is it being invested somewhere? And do you have any kind of control over how it's being invested?
Great question. So you can do whatever you want with it. You can leave it in a cash or a money market account, something low risk. You can invest it in the stock market, and you can invest it in an S&P to kind of tie back to our earlier conversation. Invest it in an S&P 500 mutual fund or ETF, and kind of grow with the stock market. So it kind of depends on your risk tolerance. Like if you actually, if you have a big anticipated medical expense coming down the road not too far, you probably want to have it in something relatively low risk, so you don't risk having to withdraw when, say, the market goes down, and you're forced to withdraw when the market's gone down. But if you've got a long-term time horizon and you really are using this as that stealth IRA, and you're able to cover anything, unanticipated or anticipated out of pocket, invested in riskier assets like the stock market, like the S&P 500, or even something riskier than that, and let it grow, and essentially treat it as if it were your IRA.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And so are there any other vehicles like that you have an opportunity to use?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan. There's a whole bunch of things out there. Some of them are plain vanilla, like the 529 account for setting up college savings. Another thing that a lot of folks overlook is, I mentioned that the tax code is written for business owners, in a way. And if you're a business owner, there's something called a solo 401k that you can set up. So if you work at, I'll use the example of Nike. I live in the Pacific Northwest, not too far from Nike headquarters. So if you go and work for Nike, someone from HR is going to pop in your office and say, hey, you got to fill out this paperwork. How much do you want to contribute to your 401k? We'll match X%. Like, it's all very easy, right? If you're a business owner, one of the downsides is that a lot of times there's no HR who's going to come in and handle everything for you, right? So you've got to do this yourself. You're essentially the employee and the employer. So if you want a 401k plan, you've got to set it up yourself. So that's the bad news. The good news is there's something called a solo 401k that can be incredibly powerful. It can allow business owners to put aside up to, in 2024, the limit is actually $69,000 that you're able to get in there. Compared to if you're doing the Nike 401k, I think the limit is 23,000 or 23,500. So I can kind of get into kind of the mechanism of how that works here. But if you're a business owner, you can put away up to $69,000, and even more if you're above age 50 each year into a solo 401k. So this can be a really powerful tool. A lot of business owners screw this up. Honestly, I'll confess to this. When I was a business owner for the first time, I screwed this up. I didn't set up a 401k, and I kick myself for not doing it because I lost. It cost me a lot of money for not setting this up, and I didn't make those tax advantage contributions during those years that I could have. So I'd encourage any business owner, if you're not contributing to a 401k, you should be. And it's as easy. It's incredible. It's so easy to set up. There's essentially off the shelf plans from Vanguard or Fidelity. It's very easy to do and allows you to shelter and tax defer a lot of your income.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that. We had a guest on that kind of went through each of those different types of plans, and found it very interesting because I had no idea. And I mean, we're talking decent amount here, so that you have the ability.
Absolutely. And again, I want to just drive this home. That $69,000 number that I threw out there, that's each year. If your spouse, or if you can justify your spouse working for your business, like double it, right? Like this is potentially a massive amount of money that you can shelter from taxes by doing something that's pretty cheap and pretty easy to set up.
Yeah, that's fantastic. How about we had talked a little bit at the before the show started about opportunity zones, but
Yeah.
you mind diving into that and kind of talking about the advantages of it?
Yeah. So another great as a theme here. I hope we're making taxes exciting here, aren't we?
We
Taxes
are
they're not
definitely.
exciting when you got to pay taxes, but they're super exciting when you're talking about how you're going to avoid paying taxes, right? So
That's right.
oppor- opportunity zones are another incredible tax incentive. My business partner Jimmy Atkins says it's the greatest tax incentive ever created. So let me actually zoom out here a little bit. So opportunity zones were created in 2017 as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But the idea actually came from going back almost a decade before that to the crisis of 2008. And what happened is after that, some parts of the country bounced back pretty quickly, right? Like the relatively wealthy neighborhoods and parts of the country bounced back relatively quickly from that. I don't want to diminish the financial pain that was felt there. But the low income parts of our country were much, much slower to recover. So a group of policymakers, a bipartisan, by the way, group of policymakers got together and said, well, how can we incentivize investment into the poorest areas of the country? And what they came up with is they said, well, there's a lot of money that folks have made over the last decade here that's in highly appreciated stocks and bonds and businesses. So let's give those people an incentive to sell their stocks and their bonds that have these big capital gains. And let's give them an incentive to invest the proceeds from that into the poorest parts of the country, into low income, essentially zip codes or census tracts throughout the US. So what this program did, the solution was we're going to create a bunch of so-called opportunity zones. So there's 8,764 census tracts throughout the country. They're in every state. They're in Puerto Rico. They're in Washington, D.C., and they're in every major city and a lot of rural areas as well. So these are low-income census tracts, and they've been designated by their governor and approved by the Treasury Department. And essentially the tax incentive is if you have a capital gain, so you sell stocks, you sell ETFs, you sell mutual funds, you sell your business, you sell crypto, right? Anything, any type of capital gain. There is a tax incentive if you take that capital gain and you invest it into an opportunity zone. And the tax incentives, there's a couple components of it. So number one, you get to defer that capital gain until December 31st, 2026, which means you don't have to pay it until April 2027. And there's big value in that, right? Instead of having to pay the taxes today, you can push it off for more than 2 years here, essentially. And with interest rates where they are, that's pretty valuable time value of money, right? But the bigger piece of this comes from if that investment is held for 10 years. So it needs to be patient capital. You need to be able to make this investment and hold it for 10 years. Then when that is sold, it's all tax free. There's no capital gains on the back end. So let's just use some big round numbers here. So say I have a $1 million capital gain. I sold my business. I've got $1 million capital gain. I get to defer. I invested in an opportunity zone fund. I can defer that capital gain tax until 2027. But let's say I take that $1 million, I invest it in an opportunity zone, and it grows to, let's say it grows to $5 million over 10 years. Like that would be doing pretty well, but just to use nice round numbers here. At the end of 10 years or more than 10 years, when you have a liquidity event, this investment is sold. That's all tax free. There's no capital gains on that.
Wow.
So I like to think of it as like a super Roth IRA in a sense that it's for folks who can hold for the long term and are comfortable making this investment, potentially massive tax advantages. So what are these investments? So there's a couple more requirements here. There is the geographic requirement. So you've got to be investing in one of these census tracts. And then the other requirement is essentially you have to double the basis of what you're doing, or it has to be original use. So the intent here is we don't want people to just buy an apartment building and run it as a slumlord and then, make profits off of that. We want them to improve the properties that they're investing in. So if you buy a property for $1 million, you have to put at least $1 million into it. You have to double the basis, or you have to do ground up construction. So a lot of times you'll see an opportunity zone project that is buying a piece of land and they're putting up an apartment building, or they're building a warehouse, or they're putting up a hotel. So it could be original use. They could be doing ground up construction, or they're going to be doing essentially substantial renovations, buying an apartment complex for $5 million and putting another 5 into it so that it becomes a much, much higher quality standard of building. with the idea of, again, not just buying and holding in these neighborhoods, but actually building new things, building new places to live, building new places to shop and visit, or significantly improving what's already there. So, I'm biased. This is a big part of what we do is connecting folks, but I think it's an incredible tax advantage, and this program is meeting the spirit of the law. It's funneled so far by a lot of estimates, 150 billion with a B, has flowed into these low income census tracts. And these are parts of the country that previously weren't getting a lot of investment. So, I think Jimmy's right. I think it is one of the greatest tax incentives ever created.
Yeah, it really sounds like it. Because if you were selling real estate, obviously you could 1031, but you're really just deferring your gain at that point. But it sounds like if you were to do that and then invest in an opportunity zone, you literally can, hold it for that 10 years. And the gain that you've made over that course of time, you don't have to pay any capital gain on it when you exit.
That's exactly, you're thinking about it exactly right. So you could with a 1031, you could do like the swap till you drop, right? But and then your heirs will get a step up in basis. The tough part about that is you've got to die for that to happen, right?
Exactly.
So there's a lot of parallels with the 1031, but you don't have to die in order to get that full step up in basis. And then the other big advantage is 1031 is limited to real estate. And this is not. It can be, your capital gain can come from anything. So a lot of folks out there, maybe they don't have real estate, but they've got Apple stock that they bought 20 years ago, or they got Tesla stock that they bought 5 years ago, or they've got Bitcoin that they bought a while ago. Like any capital gains generated from selling those are eligible for this. So it's essentially opening up the tax advantages of the 1031, but it's a way for people who don't happen to own real estate to do it.
And when you say you have to, so you do have to double your basis when you purchase this. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. So what that means is if you are doing, and by the way, it doesn't have to be real estate. It could be, you could go and open an operating business. It's in an opportunity zone. Mm-hmm. They do tend to be real estate. So I'm going to stick with that example to simplify it here. So if you were to, so let's say you have just to use nice round numbers here, let's say you actually had a $10 million capital gain, and you wanted to put that into invest that in an opportunity zone. You could buy a property for $5 million and double the basis in that. So put another $5 million of improvements into it, essentially. So that's where that concept of doubling the basis comes from. Is you can't just buy an apartment building and not do anything to it and collect rent, because that would not be making a substantial improvement to it. So either essentially have to make substantial improvements, or it has to be so-called original use, which would be any type of, any time that you do ground up construction would qualify for that original use. So a couple ways to meet that requirement. And, that does limit you, to be honest here, about, you can't just buy that cash flowing asset, right? It does have to be something that that you see opportunity, you see a big value add opportunity, or you're doing ground up construction. And a lot of opportunity zone projects do tend to be ground up construction, which works well with that 10-year holding period, because especially right now, construction takes a little while.
Right. What about when you are doubling that basis? Does that all have to be, that investment all have to come in year one, or can it be capital improvements that you're making kind of in phases as you're holding it during that 10 years?
Great question. So you've essentially got you've got time. You've got over the course of 3 to 5 years that you have to put that money to work. So you've got time. There's kind of a safe harbor period during which because this takes time, especially depending on where you live. There you got environmental reviews. You've got getting as your audience knows, and well, real estate can be complicated, and it can take a little bit of time. But you don't have to put it all to work on day one here. And I should mention too here that I've kind of been talking about if you want to do this actively, meaning you want to go out and buy a business yourself and be kind of the GP and run things. There's folks who are doing this who will take your money, and you can essentially be a limited partner. So you can just write a check. You can realize the capital gain. You can write a check and be a kind of a passive limited partner with an existing real estate developer, essentially, a real estate fund manager. who's been doing this for a long time. And a lot of folks have been doing this real estate in non-opportunity zones for a long time. And now they've set up opportunity zone funds. So you can be kind of very hands-on and do it yourself and kind of be the sole shareholder. Or you can say, you know what, this sounds awesome. I want to get these tax advantages, but I don't have the time or expertise or interest to throw up an apartment building myself. I love the investment thesis of this company or of that company. I'm going to do my due diligence, and I'm going to write them a check, and I'll let them do the work, and I'm going to be a passive and still realize all the benefits.
Yeah, that's pretty cool that you can do it both ways. It doesn't, don't have to actually be the person that's managing the project. You can be a limited partner and still have that ability upon exit of not having to pay the capital gains. So
yeah, exactly. And another difference there. We're talking about the 1031. The 1031 tends to be more active. I know you can go the DST route and Delaware Statutory Trust and be a little bit more passive doing that. But It's nice at the opportunity zone. I've made some opportunity zone investments and I have not been active. I've just written the check and I'm a limited partner, much like you are in any private real estate syndication. And it's different things are going to make sense for different folks, right? But there are kind of a couple ways to go about it, which I think is some really valuable flexibility.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, that's that you've opened my eyes to it. I've obviously heard about. I was just talking earlier this week about a friend of mine who bought a car wash he was showing me, and he bought it in an opportunity zone. He talked about holding it for the 10-year period.
Yeah.
Need to circle back with him and make sure he knows he needs to double his basis in it. But anyway, that's pretty neat. So, I mean, I've heard of them. I just bought a property, and unfortunately, the side of the street that I'm on is not opportunity zone, but the other side is. So I was like this close to really trying to understand what that would have meant. But that's cool. You've helped out with that.
It is funny. So, they are these census tracts, and it's exactly like you just said. Sometimes you're just going from one side of the street to the other, and you cross over, and all of a sudden you're not eligible for it. And unfortunately, I get people asking me this all the time. They say, "Could I petition someone to have it be in an opportunity zone?" I say, "Well, technically, but it's your member of Congress. Like, it's going to take an act of Congress to change this." And it's possible, but good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. What about, maybe tell us a little bit about your Wealth Channel Academy, and what is that all about?
Yeah, so my idea here is that for a lot of people, retirement planning and creating wealth is incredibly complex, and they're totally overwhelmed by the process. But I don't actually think any of this is all that complicated. Like, I don't think that the problem is that there's not enough information out there. I think in a way it's that there's way too much stuff out there. Like, we have multiple 24/7 cable networks devoted to covering Wall Street. There's hundreds of websites. There's millions of videos out there. So it's easy to feel like overwhelmed, I think, with this idea of just something that should be basic, like planning for retirement. So my idea with this is to just kind of radically simplify the whole thing, explain it in simple terms to folks who are smart and who are sophisticated and successful. But again, to go back to our earlier conversation, maybe don't have that financial background. They've done something, their profession is something completely different. To break this stuff down into terms that everyone can understand, really simplify these concepts and focus again on what's going to move the needle and what isn't. There are some things that are really important, like tax efficiency and like minimizing fees. And then there's other things that folks get so caught up with that don't matter all that much. So my goal with this project is to make it so that anyone out there, I don't think that a worry-free retirement should be a luxury good. I think it should be something that everyone understands. At the end of the day, it's really not that complicated. So if I do my job well and I simplify these topics and break them down, everyone will kind of feel empowered. They'll feel like they can wrap their heads around it. They understand where they're going and they understand how they're going to get there, and they understand the tools that they have at their disposal. And we've been talking about those tools over the last half hour or so here, things like the HSA, things like opportunity zones, all these incredibly powerful tools that can help you get where you're going. That's the vision with Wealth Channel Academy. It's been a ton of fun so far. We've put out a lot of episodes. We've got a handful of episodes we've gotten really great feedback on. It's resonating with people. They get it. They say, okay, thank you for breaking this down into kind of simple terms that I can understand. You're right. It's not that overwhelming. It's not that complicated. And like, something clicks. There's this aha moment, and you get it. And it's a beautiful thing. So we're excited about that. I'm excited to be continuing to work on that project.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like a great contribution, and it is something that people get a little confused about. And
Yeah.
even you can't always mirror mom and dad and know what they were doing. From a financial, of course, my mom and dad, I can, mom and dad, but you can't always, right? You can't always learn it that way. And really, we don't teach a whole lot about it in school. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's subjects where we cover some of it, but just basic finance and investing, it really does not get the attention that I think it deserves. And so it's a great
Absolutely.
service.
I could not agree. I could not agree with you more. We don't teach it to our parents. Don't teach it to their kids. Teachers don't teach it to their students. Employers, like I think that this would be a great service that employers could offer to new hires just out of school, right? Like helping
Right.
them to understand some of these things. Like that could be a role that they could fill. But I think America is the greatest country in the world, but we get a failing grade at financial literacy. Like it's bad. People don't get this stuff, and part of it is yes, it is complicated, and the tax code is 8,000 pages or however long it is, and some of these things can be a little bit complicated, but part of it is just doing a better job of basic education. And I'm going to sound like maybe a little bit woo woo here, but like just think about the impact that has if folks get on track for a worry free retirement, and they are essentially better investors, and they do the right things, the basic things that they should. Like I think it improves a lot of issues with our society. Like I think greater wealth translates into better health outcomes. Like people are
For sure.
healthier as they've got more money. It certainly translates into to more stable and probably bigger families as well. A lot of anxiety is related to money troubles. A lot of relationship troubles come back to that. So I do think, again, maybe people are rolling their eyes at me and thinking, "What's this guy talking about?" But I do think to the extent that we can get people on track to really own their finances and be on track for a worry-free retirement. It doesn't solve everything, but it's going to make a dent in it. It's going to make a dent in the health problems and the relationship problems, the family problems. So that's my view of it, at least.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let me ask you this, Michael. Is there anything that maybe I didn't ask that you wanted to cover during our time together?
I would just say, go back to my soapbox here. I'd say encourage everyone to think about your tax bill in a different way. Think about what you're paying in taxes and what you could be doing with that money. And I'd encourage you to. A lot of folks have mental blockers for one reason or another. They think that they're worried about stepping over a line and getting out of bounds, or they're worried they're going to get audited, or they're thinking like, well, I have an obligation to pay taxes, and yes, we all have an obligation to pay taxes, but essentially, think about it: pay what you legally owe, and not a penny more. And think about what you could do with that money if it weren't going to taxes. Like I'm not Scrooge McDuck. I'm not like diving into a pile of gold coins every night and thinking, how do I get 5 more gold coins so I can dive into it? No, the money that I save in taxes, it's going to be spent on doing things with my family. It's going to end up in the pockets of employees who work at the businesses that I patronize, and it's going to end up at the charities and the causes that I support. So I think you have an obligation to kind of think about that from a different perspective. Think about what it means to your family, and what it means to the places that would be the beneficiaries of you being a more tax efficient investor.
Yeah, for sure. Michael, how can folks find out more about you if they want to connect with you, if they want to hear more about the Wealth Academy, Wealth Channel?
Yeah. Yeah. Go to wealthchannel.com, and we've got a link to Wealth Channel Academy there. It's all free, by the way. I didn't mention that, but all the educational resources we're putting out there are free.
Great.
So that's the best way. Go to wealthchannel.com, and you can find our social handles there as well. Love to connect with anyone.
Absolutely. Well, I've got two other questions that I ask every guest, and this one will be right up your alley. What advice would you give somebody who's maybe just starting out their investment journey?
Yeah, I'd say find a mentor, find someone who you can trust, who's been there before. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. And if you can find someone who you trust, and someone who's been there before, they will save you. They will save you a lot of heartache. They will save you from, getting a lot of bad information and spinning your wheels and kind of trying to reconcile all the conflicting stuff that's out there. Because it's a mess out there trying to find sometimes, good, trustworthy, valuable information. So find a mentor, find someone who's older, who's made mistakes, who will tell you about their mistakes. Like I told you before, I made a bunch of dumb mistakes. Like I'm not afraid to admit it. People are going to benefit from that. There's a saying that good judgment comes from experience and experience comes from bad judgment, right? So find someone who's got that experience because they made those mistakes, and be the beneficiary of it.
For sure. All right. Michael, how about a book recommendation? It doesn't have to be finance related, but it can be, just something that's been impactful to you.
Yeah. I've got a 14-month-old, so I took a little hiatus from reading, but I'm finally getting back into it as I've gotten a little bit more time and a little bit better sleep. I'll give you one. I think it's right over my other shoulder here. There's a biography that just came out. It's called King. It's the biography of Martin Luther King Jr. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most impactful people in American history. Incredible man, incredible legacy, but not a perfect man. And it's his story, warts and all, the mistakes that he made professionally and personally as well. So really, really impactful, I think, especially for anyone who didn't live through that part of American history. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot from it.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I haven't had that recommendation yet, so I'll have to check that one out myself. Well, Michael, I've enjoyed this. This has been great. I really enjoyed hearing not only about the health savings accounts, but the opportunity zone, and you really clarifying that for myself and for the audience. So really appreciate it. Thanks for being on the Wealth Flow.
Yeah, my pleasure. Appreciate you.
All right, take care.
Being that you're still here, I trust you found value in this episode. I personally wish I would have known these guests and strategies when I started my wealth creation journey. Go to wealthflow.capital to subscribe to our newsletter. And as a free gift, we will send you our quarterly market report and the top 10 things to look for in an investment opportunity. Take a minute to give our show a rating and review. Help us reach 1 million professionals by subscribing and sharing this episode with someone you know who could also find value in it.